Please welcome our next speaker, Sean Astrakhan. Today, he'll be presenting his session, Power Automate, Performance Without the Pain. Please stick around after Sean's session for a live Q&A.
Hello, Doug community. Thank you so much to DynamicsCon for having me and letting me do this session. I'm so excited to do it with you. My name's Sean, and that's the end of my intro because you came here for Power Automate. I'm excited to show you techniques that go from pretty easy to more intermediate to some of the most advanced things I know about Power Automate. Our goal here is to have you speed up your flows so you can debug faster, so you can avoid bottlenecks, and so overall, you just go home sooner. These are some of my favorite techniques. I use them every week, and I'm excited for you to use them probably starting tomorrow. Our demos are going to feature predominantly Power Automate. We're going to get a little into Canvas apps, SharePoint, Dataverse, even Excel. It's going to be a lot of fun, but let's ground ourselves. The examples we're going to show is for a fake outdoor adventures company. So we're going to talk less about the kayaking, biking, and more about the instructors who run them. We want to make sure that they still have certificates, that their certificates are valid, and we want to move these instructors between systems without having issues. And one more thing, the techniques we learned today aren't just for Power Automate or even Power Platform. These techniques is just software best practices. Let's jump into it. I have this model-driven app with all of my instructors. All of my instructors have certificates, but these certificates can expire. So every night, I want to run a job that checks the certificates and make sure that they're still valid. For instance, we don't want someone teaching scuba diving if their license is expired. That's dangerous. To do that, we have this Power Automate flow where every night it runs, gets all the instructors, checks their credentials, and at the very end, it sends an email showing how many people have expired certificates. This child flow is our first opportunity to optimize. If we open it up, we'll see that it makes a call to check if the person still works at the company, and then it checks if their certificates are still valid. These two actions don't depend on each other, so they can happen in parallel. A simple way to make this run faster is if we click the plus and click on Add a Parallel Branch, pick any of these options, and then drag one of the actions to the side and then delete the one you added. And next, under settings here, we can select our action. Under select actions, it's currently happening after this one. Select this other one as well. And boom, you just saved yourself 2 or 3 seconds on this run. And this concept is called concurrency. And it doesn't just exist in Power Automate. I have a Canvas app here where I can select certain certificates and at the very end press this button and it's going to go and approve all of these people. The details don't really matter, but if we look at this code runs this universities check here and then it does this other search users. These don't have to happen one after another. So we can take this command called concurrent and then we can take our 2 actions, remove the semicolon, replace it with a comma, and then at the very end of this, close the parentheses, and boom, now they're happening at the same time. Let's take concurrency even further. So down here, I have a loop, and apply to each where I'm walking through every single instructor record. If we go back to the parent flow, we'll notice that when we get our original list of instructors, they look like this. We have the instructor's name here, their age here, and we want to add the property of their credentials status. Back inside of our child flow, we are looping through all of these instructors and using a compose statement to add the credential status. The code itself looks like this. We write TOT name, TOT years at company, exactly the same as in our original instructor's data. And we created this new property, TOT credential status. And we set it to the value we got from our statement up here. And after every loop, we are adding this instructor to our variable. So full circle, what it looks like, when we start with the data, it looks like this. We pass this data to our child flow, we get the license status, and then we loop over all of these instructors, and at the very end, our variable looks like this. Same properties as before, except the new one of their credential status on here. Now, this is all fine, except there's one issue here, which is we're doing this apply to each, and as we talked about earlier, one record at a time is really slow. Luckily, there's a simple trick to make these apply to eaches run faster. You can make them run in parallel. If we hop into our apply to each and click under settings, we have this button called concurrency control. If we turn them on, we can crank this up to having this loop not run one at a time, but 50 at a time. It's going to be so much faster. And I'll let you know ahead of time, when we have a small amount of records, you're not going to really see much differences. But once you get past 10, 20, hundreds, you're going to really notice how much faster this is. It runs a lot faster now, but there's still a problem here. And that's the fact that we're using an apply to each. Anytime you see a loop, be careful. It probably means there's a better way to do it that doesn't use a loop. Even though you can make loops concurrent, they're still not performant. We can actually replace the loop with an action called a select. It starts similar to a loop where we tell it what data we want, and then we're going to use the map function to do the same thing we did in our compose. So I'm going to select TOT name, come into here, place that, and then I can steal the value from here the same way I did it, paste it into here, and just remove the quotes. And I can follow the same model for the rest of these values. So in the end, my select looks like this. And if we come up here and rerun this, the apply to each took 3 seconds to run, and the final result was this. And if we capture it here, and then we go and look at what the select statement did, we'll see that that output is exactly the same. But the magic is that the select statement took 0 seconds to run. Because we're using this select here, we actually don't need this whole apply to each anymore, and we don't need this variable either. Zooming out, our code just went from 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 actions down to only 4. Performance leads to not only faster flows, but also less code. This concept of avoiding loops isn't specific to Power Automate, it's across software. It appears in Power Pages, .NET, whatever you're doing, even Canvas apps. For instance, this app helps me evaluate potential people we could hire. So I can give them 5 stars and say, great background, and then hit plus, and this updates their information in SharePoint here. But if I want to give everybody the same star results, like every candidate gets a 2, if I hit set bulk for all, you're going to notice that they start updating at not exactly the same time. Watch. Press it. There we go. This one first, then this one, then this one. Watch this. Over here we have the same list, but when I press set bulk, it's going to set them all immediately. Do you see how that happened in a flash? Let's look at the code. This button does a for all loop, which is the same concept as the apply to each, so it's not very performant. However, this button over here, set bulk once, does a patch, meaning it does the update all in one go. Same concept as a select. The main lesson I'm trying to drive home here is it's not about memorizing that, oh, in Power Automate I have to use a select, and Canvas apps I have to use patch. As an architect, I don't have time to memorize everything inside of the Power Platform, but by knowing these best practices, I know what to look out for in code. That's how I discovered select and patch, because I knew to look for it. Here's another example that tricks some of the best developers. If we go to our parent flow, we start with this action of getting all the instructors, and they look like this. We pass the instructors to our child flow, and the output is like this, where it shows their credential status. And at the very end, we send an email. There are a total of this many invalid instructors, and the instructor's first name is, and we use the first expression and we select TOT name. This is fine. The code totally works, but I see this issue happen all the time, especially when you have large teams with multiple developers. If developer Jimmy is working on this flow and developer Erica is working on this child flow, developer Jimmy might say, oh, in my list of instructors, I have this other property called age. I had it at the beginning of my flow here. I would like to use it down here. So they go into here and decide to edit the flow and say the instructor's first name is blank and their age is, go into here into the expression and type in first from the list. Under dynamic content, they select the child flow, and at the very end, they're going to come into here and type in TOT age, because that's what this is. They should be able to select it. And then they click add. I'm going to click save here. And when I run this again, do you think this is going to work? Let's resubmit and see. It's running fine down here, going to the child flow, and then at the very end, oh, I get this giant error that says that TOT age does not exist. Wait, that doesn't make any sense because it's totally right here, TOT age. What happened? The problem is data started like this, but once we got into this flow, the other developer changed it and modified the original data structure. It's a particularly dangerous error because you don't notice it for a while, because at first all the code works, but as you make changes later, you break really important logic downstream. The rule that was broken here was the open-closed principle. It means objects or code should be open for extension, but closed for deletion or heavy modification. It actually comes from the pro code world where there's a term called solid, and the O here stands for the open-close principle. But just because it's used in pro code means we can take these rules and apply some of them to low code. It's easier to understand with an example. Let's go visit a grocery store.
You and I are going grocery shopping. So far, you put in the cart cereal and
peanut butter.
Right, peanut butter. And say you asked me to get glue. There's something wrong here. You expect me to take the cart, add things, and not drop anything.
And that's the open-close principle.
Exactly. Are we paying for this?
Let's see this in action. If we want to include age in here, the wrong way to do it is click into here and type in TOT_age, because sure, that'll work now, but if there are a lot of values here, this isn't scalable. Instead, we're going to duplicate this, and then inside of it, we're going to get rid of all these properties and we're going to click on this text mode. And instead of recreating the object, we're going to come into here into the expression and type in add property. And the first, we have to put the word item there because it refers to an individual item in the list. And the next one is, what do we want to call it? TOT credential status. And then the value it's going to be is under dynamic content, we go and select credential status and then click add. Let's call this select not dropping things. If we then click save and we rerun this, we'll see our old method took data that looked like this and turned it into this, where it's dropping properties. But our new version now took that same data and turned it into this, where it's exactly the same, but look at that. Credential status is there, and it's there for every single one of the properties while retaining the others. And the moment of truth, if we go to our failed flow because of TOT age and we resubmit it, we'll see that now when it runs, it actually works completely. And at the very end, our final output is the first instructor name is Ahmed and their age is 31. So by following the open-close principle, we never have to worry about the source data changing because we're not changing it, we're just adding to it. Plus, it uses less code and runs a lot faster. For all you SharePoint lovers, in this example, we have a list of instructors in SharePoint. And this list tracks all the languages that are spoken by these instructors, but our source data is still in model-driven apps. What if we want to combine these two data sources? So we want to take these model-driven app instructors, but add their languages spoken from this complete other system. The first time you try this, it can be a mess. You have a for loop for all of these instructors, and then an if condition where if the SQL ID matches the instructor model-driven apps, and then it does a for loop checking all of these. But I'm going to show you how to do it in 4 actions. So we have our instructors from our model-driven apps as we've seen before, but then inside of here, we have our SharePoint instructors. And let's put all this data in XML. It's going to look weird at first, but then you're going to love it. So I'm going to go into here and add a compose action. And we have to put it in this format. We have to build this JSON object that's called root, and it has a property called array inside of it. And in the end, we want to select our SharePoint list items. That's all we need to do. Click save. And I'm going to call it compose prepare for XML. And then I'm just going to duplicate it to make it go faster. And this time I'm going to delete all this, and I'm going to use the expression called XML. And then I'm going to pass in what we just did earlier where we prepared the XML. And then let's call this instructors as XML. Let's run it and see what we got so far. So I just resubmitted it, and down here was our JSON that we made. And then once we converted it to XML, it looks like garbage. It's all of this. But if we copy it, we can put it in this tool called XPather. So I just pasted it here and formatted it, and it looks ugly, but there's a lot we can do with this. But because it's an XML, we can query it really efficiently. If I type in root/array, I've now selected everything. Not very impressive. But watch this, where SQL ID equals, let's say, 5. Okay, we've just selected the record that matched 5. Let's switch it up. Let's do 3. Now we've selected the third one, which is this right here, where SQL ID equals 3. We've selected this whole row. But I could take it a step further and say, don't just select the whole row, select where language is spoken. Boom, I selected Italian. Do you see where I'm going with this? I can now use that add property we learned about earlier and then dynamically change this value, and things get exciting. Watch. Let's come back into here and do another compose and use a select this time. And we're going to call this select prepare for join. And then our source data is the XML preparation we did earlier. And we're going to click this text mode. And in here, we're going to use a different expression called concat. And inside of it, concat puts 2 strings or puts 2 pieces of text together. And I'm going to select this that we created right here. If we break this down, we're going to do concat here, and then we got to split this apart because we're going to dynamically select the 3. And we're going to first wrap this up in quotations, and then also wrap the rest of this up out here into quotations. So we have 1, 2, 3 pieces that we're going to concat shove together. But instead of 3, what we want is inside of our SharePoint list, if we look at the outputs of what it gives us, the property we care about is SQL ID. So let's select that. And in here, instead of 3, we're going to type in item parentheses and then put in SQL ID. So now here I can copy all of this. So in the end, the final statement looks like this. And if we run it and take a look, we'll see that the final result is here, where it is dynamically selecting the individual SQL ID. So inside of here, we could pick the languages and people we actually care about. And this final step is where things get very fun. We're going to do one more select. And our from is going to be not our SharePoint list, but our JSON of all of our instructors from here. And then we're going to come in here and use add property one more time. And this is just like last time. The first thing we need is item and the property name, which is languages spoken. Next, we do XPath selecting first our source data, which is just when we wrapped XML around the SharePoint instructors. And then last, we have the expression we already practiced earlier, which is concat plus the SQL ID chosen dynamically. So if we select all of this, we just paste the expression into here, And then if we rerun this, we have our array from earlier, SharePoint JSON, then our SharePoint data is XML, and then we have this join, which is honestly of no use. This is just a demo, but the real magic is this select join, where the data came in looking like this with all our model-driven app instructors, and then the output is this, our model-driven app instructors, plus their languages spoken, appropriately shown right here. How amazing is that? We pulled that off in, I said 4, but it's actually 3 because we don't even need one of these actions. And XPath can get even more insane. I have a whole new set of JSON down here that says ratings, where we take all of these SQL IDs and the scores that they got, like maybe people were leaving testimonials for our instructors. So SQL ID number 2 got a 4, got a 2, got a 5. That means Saiju scored a good rating the first day, a kind of bad one the second day, the third day he did really well. But what if we want to add these up and group them and add like a total rating score for this instructor? We're definitely not using apply to each. What we can do is do the same thing as before. We're going to root array and set it up like this. And then the next step, you guessed it, we take this, turn it into XML, which same as before simply means creating a compose. And then inside of it, all I need to do is the expression XML and then just select what we had earlier and click add. And what this gets output is like this, where it's really ugly again, but we can do expressions like SQL ID equals 2, languages spoken isn't actually anything that lives here, and instead we're going to do rating. Perfect. But getting a list of all these numbers doesn't help. We want to add them together. Luckily, there's an expression at the very beginning called sum, and if we put that here, look at that, 11, it got it. And it's not just limited to sum. We could do things like average and other ones. So instead of this time where we try to match the language, we're going to also aggregate it. So last time we matched on SQL ID and got the language. This time we're going to get the rating and summarize it. So this time we're going to come in here and add a select once again, and the from is going to be just like last time, where we select our previous ratings as XML. And then in here, we're going to do the add property. The difference being for languages, it looked like this. But for the sum, it looks similar, where we're going to do our item again. We're going to call it rating sum. Everything looks the same, except this time we're going to put this sum at the beginning. And we're really just recreating this right here and click add. If we run this again, we'll see that our data started like this, where we did add languages, but then what it comes out as is languages, plus we have the rating sum down here for all our records. And we did it all in 1, 2, 3, 4 actions. Technically, we can do it in only 3. XML and XPath are great at using few actions in Power Automate, but the ultimate way to save actions is to make the other systems do the work. For instance, the Graph API. It's an API that gives access to almost all of Microsoft's actions, such as these actions in Dataverse or these in SharePoint. For instance, let's say I have this list of activities and I want to put them all into this Excel list. I could use this apply to each and do one row at a time, because unfortunately, if I went in here and typed Excel, there's no action here that lets me batch send records. And you may be thinking, oh, but couldn't I just go into settings and turn on concurrency like this? Yeah, you could, and it seems fine, but watch what happens. If I run this in here, it'll run fairly quickly. Okay, only 4 seconds. And then if we look at our results, okay, here they are, it got populated, but let's zoom in here. Do you see any issues right now with this data? I'll give you a second to take a look. What's wrong here? Yeah, all of these IDs are out of order, because when you do apply to each, the point is it runs in parallel, so it doesn't listen to the order you have. Here's where the Graph API is amazing. If we hit the plus here under add action and type in HTTP, we're going to see one that says HTTP with Microsoft Entra ID. This lets us talk to the Graph API without a bunch of authentication. The Graph API is the backbone for almost all of Microsoft's services. So we can go into here and type in SharePoint. We have access to SharePoint. We have access to Excel, all kinds of things. So I can take this URL here. This just finds out who the current user is, and then paste that into here, save it. And if we run it, we'll notice that the output is exactly the same as we see right here, right down there. But okay, so Graph API talks to SharePoint and Excel, so does Power Automate. Why would you use this? Because the Graph API actually has more powers than Power Automate does. For instance, if I wanted to do something like search for all my SharePoint sites, list them out, that type of command does not exist in our list of SharePoint actions. But if we go to the Graph API documentation, we totally can do that. For instance, this action, I'm getting more information about my SharePoint site, and what the output is includes the ID of my SharePoint site, which is going to come in handy in a second, the name of my SharePoint site, all kinds of other information that I may not be able to get with just Power Automate. Once I have my site ID, I can also use other commands to get the ID of files within that site. And then I could do other things in the Graph API, such as work with Excel. For instance, in this one, we have commands to delete a worksheet, add a worksheet, or update a worksheet with certain properties. For instance, if we want to batch create records in Excel, like send 100 to be created right away, we can't do that with Power Automate because we have to just do this apply to each one at a time. However, with the Graph API, as soon as we know the site ID, all we need to do is pass in an object with the property values, and inside of it, pass in this JSON list we had earlier. So watch what happens. We're going to batch send a bunch of Excel records, and then we're going to do it one at a time right after, and you'll see the result. Hit submit, and so far our spreadsheet is empty. And then in here it is running, and this one's going to finish in like 2 seconds. This one is 3 seconds per record. And then on top of that, it's 5 seconds on the apply to each. So you can already see that this takes a lot longer than this one. And if we look at our result, boom, we got them all nicely ordered. It got created in 2 seconds. And at the bottom here, we have them all out of order because then the apply to each starts. So this is not only more work, but this one runs faster and is less code. And you can use this HTTP action for not just Excel and SharePoint, but also Dataverse. Here's a different flow. Our goal here is to take these records in SharePoint and create them as tasks inside of Dataverse, but we don't want to do an apply to each and create records. We want to do it all at once. Luckily, using the same invoke action we showed earlier, we can use that to connect to the Web API. The Web API is similar to the Graph API, but for Dataverse. In this case, I am selecting all of my accounts, only the name and revenue field, and selecting just the top one. How did I know how to write this? The documentation is very clear on exactly what you need to do. And it's straightforward, but if I'm being honest with you, if we go into here and type in list rows and we use the out-of-the-box Dataverse actions, this is actually really powerful. It does the same thing. You could select columns, you can sort them, you can filter them. I don't really see much benefit for the Web API here for getting data, but if you want to create data, this is your only route if you want to do it in batch. For instance, down here, I'm getting all of my SharePoint records, and let's go to the documentation for batch Dataverse. And by the way, if you scroll down, the first video on the topic is actually mine, so you can watch that if you need a refresher on this. So let's come back here and open that up. And the documentation's fairly clear. You need a GUID, which is a unique ID to identify that batch. A batch is just an amount of records that will be updated at once. From there, you just need to follow their template. You need this API URL, and underneath that, you just need to do -- batch, the GUID you created, and some of these items here. Let's break that down piece by piece. So if we come back into here, we're going to do it and apply to each to make it simple. The first thing I did was I created this batch GUID, which is as easy as coming here to the function expression and just type in the word GUID and then parentheses, and that's it. It'll make you a GUID. If you don't know what a GUID is, it just looks like this, just a unique number. The next thing, I'm going to loop through all of my files, and usually I'm against looping, but for this example, let's do it. And I'm going to literally recreate the whole template they said. So the documentation looks like this. So I'm going to steal a screenshot of that, put it up here for us. And we did -- batch underscore -- batch underscore content type, content transfer, same thing as here, post, blah, blah, blah. All you need to know is right here, this is the name of your table. You'd replace this with accounts, contacts, or whatever your custom table is. Next, you need to build a unique object or record that you want to create. So in this case, since we're going to tasks, I know I have my subject column, and all the other columns I want, I can just go to my tasks table. I can put in priority, I can put in regarding, description, whatever columns I want. And in fact, here, regarding, you'll notice is a lookup. So this supports lookups as well. In this case, I'm just hard coding a random account in my system. So I'm going to loop all my SharePoint files and just create this template for each record. So in the end, it looks like this, where I am creating an individual record. It looks like this, where here's my subject, and then here's the account that it's connected to, which is directly related to this record right here. And then after I loop all of these, the final result is something like this, where here is an individual record here, here's another record, here's another, and you make this giant list, and then you send that whole list to Dataverse. So in our case, if we resubmit this, we'll see that it took 0.6 seconds to send all these records to Dataverse. If you were doing apply to each, imagine how long that would take. And then if we actually come back in here and refresh this, boom, we got all of our records right here. And this isn't a trivial example. So I run a company that trains people to become solutions architects in the Power Platform, and we're always changing our curriculum and adding to it. But unfortunately, before we release it, we want it to go through a review process. So we take any newly created lessons and then we create them as tasks and make sure that they're using the latest technology and they're still fun and engaging. For your example, maybe you have a sales pipeline or any kind of process or pipeline. You can use the same thing to batch create a bunch of your leads, a bunch of your tasks, whatever you need. Now, there is one gotcha when you're using this type of batch request method, is if you send over a bunch of records and maybe your JSON is wrong, Dynamics or Dataverse won't tell you. A super common comment I get on this video is the flow is running successfully, but it's not creating records in the table. Unfortunately, if you're using the batch endpoint, your only way of debugging this is just coming back here, looking at the documentation and compare your JSON to what it has here. I'd suggest never sending over like 50 to 100 records. Send over 1 or 2, make sure those work, and then expand it to all 100. We have one more concept to go over, but before we do, I want to give a big thanks to the Doug community for having me and hosting this awesome event. I'm really excited about checking out some of the other sessions. And please stick around after this because I'm going to be available for Q&A. You can ask me anything Power Platform Azure related. The last concept we're going to discuss is C#. Yes, you can use it in Power Automate, but don't freak out if you don't know how to program or how to write C#. ChatGPT can do a lot of it for you. And when you use it, it's really this beautiful place where instead of a bunch of Power Automate actions, it's something that's only 2 lines of code in C#. Imagine you're collecting phone numbers on a contact form, but the problem is people don't type them in consistently. Sometimes they add a bunch of dots, but that's not what your system wants. It wants dashes. So maybe they don't include any dots, but also forget to include dashes. Or maybe they include way too many dashes. What we want is to take all these phone numbers, no matter how they wrote it, and then output it like this every time. If you tried this in just Power Automate actions, it would be a ton of conditions to watch out for. And honestly, it could be more than just these 3, and you're not going to be able to catch them all. But in C#, this is super easy because there's a tool called regex. Let's look at it. Back in Power Automate, if we come over here and click on More and we click on Discover All, we come to a page like this, and there's an area called Custom Connectors. If we open that up and we come up here to New Custom Connector, Create from Blank, I'm going to call this Phone Number Formatter and click Continue. We're going to build this custom connector here, and then inside of our flow, we're going to be able to click the plus and select it from here. The first thing we need to do is decide what the host is. You can just type in home and call it a day. Custom connectors are designed so it's easier for you to talk to other APIs and other systems. But in this case, we're going to repurpose it, talk to 0 systems, and just use the C# feature of it. And let's add a fun icon. I got the awesome Doug icon for this session here, and then let's click on security. In this case, we're going to do no authentication because it's only our users who are going to use it. Plus, they're not talking to some external system where security matters. Let's go to definition, and under actions, click new. And what does this do? We're going to say format phone number, and under description takes any phone number and converts it to this. And we got to give it a unique identifier, so format phone number. And you can add a lot more actions than this. You can put format international phone number. You could even make these high level, like format fields, and it can format addresses, phone numbers, whatever you want. And we have to give it an endpoint. So let's go down here and click on import from sample. This is going to be a post. So what that means is like, what information are we passing to the function here? Under here, I can just do http://home, and that's it. And our JSON is super simple. You can pass in whatever you want, but the structure is going to be, it's going to be expecting something called phone number, and that's it. Once you're all done with that, scroll down to import. And if you ever made a mistake like, oh, I need to add more information to this, or I spelled phone number wrong or something, you can come into here and then go in and edit it if you want to. I don't need that, so I'm going to click on AI plugin preview. And this doesn't apply for what we're doing, so let's skip ahead to code. At this point, I don't like to add a lot of code yet. I just like to make sure this works. So I'm going to click on code enabled. I'm going to select our operation of format phone number. And then down here, here's the default code it gives you. It's just going to show the words hello world on the screen. And then we're going to scroll to test. Before we can test it, we have to create it. I also like to create now because some problems can appear, like maybe you don't have the right permissions or some kind of Azure setting, whatever it is. It's nice to figure this out now before you start writing and testing out your C#. Great, it worked. And to test this, I do need to make a new connection. And then let's test this out. I don't need to pass any phone numbers to it yet because it's just going to output the words hello world. So let me click the test. And 200, hello world. Great, we are cooking. Let's add real code. So I'm going to hop into ChatGPT. And if you're using Edge, you can just have Copilot do this for you. But I'm going to say, write me C# code for a custom connector that takes poorly formatted phone numbers and outputs it in this format. And I like to give it some example code to work with. So if we come under here and go into code, and then I'm just going to copy this and then say, use this as a base. All right, it's using the default libraries that come with C#. It's setting it all up. And what it wrote out is, first it's getting the phone number from our request, because remember we called it phone number. That's what this was right here. And then next is it passed to this format phone number function, which is down here. And then it removes any non-numeric characters, and then it puts it into the format we want. You might have to play with this a couple times. Like here, it did not use regex, which is the library I prefer. So I had it recreate it here. And then the final answer it gave me did use regex, and that's much cleaner. So I'm gonna copy this code, come back into here, go into the code, and then take this and delete it. But be careful here. Make sure that at the top script and script base are still there, or otherwise this won't work. Remove this, paste it. Let's go to the top. Script and script base are still there. Very, very good. I'm going to click update connector. And I got an error, which is fun. That's why we're gonna do this naturally how you would, so you know how to solve these issues. It got this request extension. Anyways, I copy and pasted that in here. I'm fully aware of what the error is. It's trying to use a request library that isn't part of the main .NET libraries it gives you. So here's a version that doesn't use that. I'm gonna copy this, come back into here, and then under code, paste it all again and hit update connector. So that version worked. I did not get any errors. And then the moment of truth, let's actually test this. So if we come in here, I'm going to take one of these really bad emails here, copy it into here, and then test it. And look at that. Original phone number looked like this, and the formatted one looks like this. Neat, right? But let's try this in the wild. So if we come into here and then inside of here, click plus, and then under runtime, let's go to custom. There's our phone number formatter. Let's pick that, select this action, pick the phone number parameter. And then what we're gonna pass into here is the bad phone number. And then afterwards, just to prove that it works, we're gonna do another compose, and we're gonna output the results of that one, which is the body. What it's actually called is formatted phone number. That's it. Paste that into here, click add, and then hit save. And now if we test this and we run it, isn't that neat how it appears there? Click continue. So our phone number came in looking like this. And then the output of it is like that. There we go. You have the full power of C# without having to really know how C# works. Thank you so much, Doug, for having me. It's been an honor to be here. I hope you've gotten something out of this, and thank you so much for your attention. Please connect with me on LinkedIn. Here's a QR code. I'm always posting new video tutorials almost weekly, or if I'm presenting at a user group, I also do 3-day crash courses, completely free. Come join us, and please reach out. I would love to connect with you. I'm going to be hanging around for the Q&A session, so please bring me any question. It doesn't even have to be around Power Automate. Anything in the Power Platform, even Azure space, I'll be happy to answer. I'm looking forward to meeting all of you. Hey fam, good to see all of you. Thank you for sticking around for my presentation. Let's see what we got. All right, Nathan, you've got a question about the open close principle. I'm gonna, to the annoyance of everyone, I'm gonna share my screen to answer your question here. Let me do that here, present, share screen. Okay, share screen. And then I'm gonna go to this window here, and then I'm assuming you all can see my screen. Yeah, I think you can. Okay, cool. So Nathan, we're going to do it power effects wise. So you were asking about the open close principle. So in this case, let's say you have a convert temperature one, because that was the example you gave. And let's say it accepts a parameter that's like text. Do you want Celsius or do you want Fahrenheit? And then the other parameter it accepts is, well, the temperature, and that's an integer, 78, 52, whatever. You do a bunch of stuff. And then at the end, you return like just an integer, just a number. So in terms of the open close principle, what you can do here is it is perfectly valid for you to come in here. And then let's say you add another parameter and then you say, I don't know, like kind of country or something. Country is expanding upon the function you already have here. So that's absolutely fine to do, as long as at the very end of all the code changes you do, at the very end, you still have this parameter, you still have this parameter, you still have this. Those three are really important because all your old code still uses that. This is open for extension, but closed for modification. Don't modify these, but you can totally extend and like add this. That's like a super power effectsy example of how, like what that means. And then otherwise, yeah, all your code will work and that's absolutely fine. What's going to be a serious problem though is if you take this and instead of an integer, you turn this into like text here, or at the end you output an array. That's bad because all your old code is going to totally crash. So yeah, there you go. Any other questions here? In the middle of my first problem, this will help me for optimize them and help answer ahead. So thank you. Yeah, of course. A lot of this is kind of what I've stumbled across a lot. Other people that I've seen that I'm sure you follow, Damian Bird and Paul Marana, have amazing tutorials as well. Definitely worth looking at for speeding it up. On my channel, obviously, I have my examples as well of stuff that I've encountered. Yeah, if nobody has any other questions, I'm happy to show a pretty neat AI thing I've been kind of building that I think is kind of fun. I think all of you will get a kick out of. I think I'm here, I think 1:30 does this end. I have like, what, another 15 minutes, Selden or Diamond, is that right? All right, let's go with it. We're gonna keep going here until I get kicked out. So let me share one more time here. And show you this other thing that I think is very neat. Cool. So yeah, I have this Power App here, and what I've been exploring is this idea. Do you have any videos in JavaScript for creating buttons in the ribbon workbench? Actually, Scott Duro is your guy for all of that. But this actually, your question, if you can put it in the chat here, what exactly are you trying to do with the ribbon workbench? Because if you saw Nathan's question earlier, a lot of the ribbon workbench, you can pull off a lot of it in using Power Effects, and you actually don't need any JavaScript. What do you recommend for Power Automate Learning Restore? I've been working with the tool for a few months and would love to deep dive. Yeah, so my channel, I would recommend as one. Also, like the GOAT, Damian Bird and Paul Marana have excellent channels for like they're producing content on Power Automate all the time. Also, does it Flow Joe is another great one. Big fan of his. Cool. If no other questions here, the next point I'll say is, yeah, so one thing I've been playing around with is I see a lot of like AI tools that are helping like us as developers. But I think a key point is like, we're as developers aren't the ones that are really bringing money to the company. The person who brings money to the company is other companies that pay your company. So what I like to think about are what kinds of AI tools can I use that the customer would love, that the end user would love? And one of the ones I've been playing with is I have here like this SQL activities list. And it's pretty fine. So this is this right here, this list of outdoor activities. This is coming from a, where is it? It's coming from a SQL database called activities. So not Dataverse, it's coming from a SQL database. But if I try to use this out of the box preview tool, and I want to say things like show activities where the waiver is required. So like activities like skydiving or horseback riding, stuff like that. I've noticed that these tools aren't quite there some of the time. So you have to be careful with it. So one thing I've been exploring is you could just use AI Builder and you can do fascinating prompts such as coming over here and saying, take this question here, take the user's question and convert it to SQL on my database. So once that's done, so whatever they put in here, I want you to turn that into a SQL query. So whoever is typing this has no idea how SQL works. It's going to take all of this and then it's going to turn it into a SQL query. And I'll actually show you what it looks like. So it comes in here and it looks like this: show activities where waiver is required. And then the output is this, where it says select all from DBO activities. It figures out the SQL to do that. And then once it's all done, at the very end here, it's going to go connect to my SQL database, and then it's going to like output all of my results. Like mountain biking requires a waiver, rock climbing. This is fine, but there's still a fundamental problem here, which is how do I'm still stuck with this idea here. If you look, I'm still stuck with these for loops. And if you saw my presentation, I don't really like them. But the other problem with this is I'm kind of stuck trying to find, I have to know the columns that my database is going to give me. That means I can only limit my user to talking to one database and one table specifically. But what I realized is if we can keep this really, really flexible, so the language model will figure out what the SQL query is, but then I also have the language model create the output, create the HTML. What I can end up doing is this. Let's go back into, I think I have it up here. Cool. If I go into here and I press this one, I'm going to do the same thing, which is show me activities where waiver is required. And I have nothing on this screen. I just have this text prompt. And I'm going to hit submit and haven't really prepared this at all. So we'll see if this works. It just popped out here. What is this? Is this a gallery? No, this isn't. This is just HTML. Like I didn't have to do any code. I had ChatGPT figure out the SQL. I had ChatGPT also generate the HTML for me. And all I did was output it here. So it doesn't matter if, and let's try to break it. Show me one activity where waiver is not required and just give me the name. We'll see what this does. I have no idea if this will work. We're going to try it here. Nice, cool. Family Star Campaign. Do you see what the possibilities are here? I can configure this model and go crazy with what I want to do, and I have it outputting it here. So like Copilot Studio, and this is very, very cool, but to actually get the HTML back is you get a lot more flexible, powerful options on what you can do. Cool. So I have another here. I have a Powerade snippet for posting error messages on Teams. Oh, that's fun. Whenever one of my is there a way to cover off the other problem when it doesn't trigger for X amount of time? So certain jobs doesn't run for 3 hours. Okay, if you can kind of elaborate on this, if I'm understanding your question, the problem is it hasn't run in 3 hours. That's the kind of issue you're looking to solve. I assume that's it. Yeah, so and that one, you can have, obviously the simplest solution is you can have some kind of like reoccurring job that's going to go ahead and check how often that is happening. The other one that is obviously checking every few hours if it's running. But another thing I would kind of start to look at is this Copilot tool created for, okay. Got it. All right, let me answer the one. The simple answer for that first one is yes, you would have to have something that's running periodically and checking every 3 hours if that's what you're worried about. Another one, this is getting more into the Azure side, if you can have a listener and the listener can actually like notify if something hasn't happened in a certain amount of time. That way, because otherwise the first solution I just said, that's going to be running constantly every few hours, and you really want to be doing that, but we can dive into it more. Is this Copilot tool creating flows from your Trops, trying to understand how its use can extend the power? Sure. The purpose of the tool, for real. Yeah, excellent question. So in the demo I just gave, no, I built that flow myself, and I had to kind of configure some of the language model for it. What it does, though, is it puts the power of querying into the end user's hands, which we've already seen before. But the added innovation here is also I don't have to write any code in terms of displaying it to the user, and I can make it like really pretty in whatever way I want. But again, I don't have to worry about customizing that. I'm offloading that to a ChatGPT to do. Because if you do want to customize and you do want to take control, like sometimes ChatGPT might give you a sentence, other times it might give you like a tabular result. It might not give you all the columns you want. It's a lot to work with. So in this case, when you have ChatGPT do the output and do the rendering of what the gallery or the HTML will be, it's like you don't have to worry if it's going to crash, and you don't have to take control for it. If that, I'm happy to add on to this in the other room and show it to you more if you want, because I think they're kicking me out. I have my script runner, everything opens as it should from the subgrid and main grid, but I'm having issue getting the record GUID of the customer to show up in my custom page when it's open from the subgrid on the customer's record. I have watched Scott to start from scratch. Yeah, well, if you're watching Scott's videos, that's definitely the right place to go. I guess here I would have to know: are you embedding a Canvas app or using a custom page? Because the actual they're quite different, surprisingly. What they're pushing for is that you can read this in the documentation, that they're to use custom pages inside of model-driven apps. Like it says that they advocate for them because custom pages are more lightweight. What I've noticed is that when you're actually, right, custom page, yeah. So you should absolutely be able to do that. I was literally chatting with this with other developers in the breakout room. If you want to meet me there,